You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. This week, my guest is CNBC's senior media and tech correspondent, Julia Boorstin. In 2000, Julia landed a job as a reporter at Fortune magazine to cover the business community, without a single economics or business class on her college transcript. But Julia learned on the fly and turned her limited business experience into a powerful advantage, thanks to her extraordinary work ethic and tireless preparation. Since then, Julia has had a massive impact on the business media world. She has been an on-air reporter for CNBC since 2006 and has interviewed many of the world's most powerful executives and entrepreneurs. In 2013, Julia launched the CNBC Disruptor 50, an annual list she oversees that highlights private companies transforming the economy. Julia is also the author of the book When Women Lead: What They Achieve, Why They Succeed, and What We Can Learn from Them. Her book is a deep dive on what Julia calls odds-defying leadership that female leaders utilize to power some of the world's most innovative and successful companies. Her book is a powerful roadmap and call to action for all of us, men and women, on counterintuitive approaches we can all utilize to become more effective leaders, innovative entrepreneurs, and achieve more success in any personal or professional endeavor. Julia and I recently sat down to explore her remarkable career and some of the key findings and reporting in her book. She shared so many important lessons on high-impact leadership, the power of asking questions, how to turn your outsider perspective into an advantage, and so much more. This conversation is absolutely jam-packed, and I hope you take away as much from it as I did. So, let's pull the tarp and get straight to Julia Boorstin. Where I want to begin, early in the book, the first literal page or two struck me. You dedicated the book to your parents who, quote unquote, inspired you to pursue hard things and instilled in you a love of asking questions. So I've got so many questions because I also love to ask questions. But let's start with pursuing hard things. How did they model for you the importance of pursuing hard things?
I also have to say, I also dedicated it to my husband, who is my partner in all the things, without whom the challenge of this book would not have been possible. But to go back to my parents, I think there was this sense in my family, if something was easy, then we weren't doing enough. And that my brother and I should always be pursuing challenges. And that what is gratifying is accomplishing something hard, not doing something easy. And that if you're just doing easy things, then you would feel sort of empty and like it was too easy. And this idea that if you could find challenges, then you would stretch and grow, and then you could feel this sort of great sense of gratification. So I think this was something I was just always raised with, whether it was academically or with my extracurriculars. I did piano and dance and all of these things. So it's always about what's the challenge? What's the challenge? It's okay if you're uncomfortable. My dad used to say to me, which I think about now that I'm on television every day, but when I would say, I'm so nervous before I had a piano recital or a dance performance, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so nervous, or a test. I'm so nervous. And you say, that feeling you're feeling isn't nervousness, it's excitement. You're excited to do something hard. So sort of recasting that anxiety as a positive thing that you could channel towards better performance ultimately.
Julia, I am curious on the other part of the dedication to your parents, the asking of questions, the power of questions. Obviously, you have asked so many questions to so many powerful and successful, interesting people. I'm curious if you remember the first time as a child or a teenager when you asked a question and realized the possibilities of asking questions.
Well, I mean, it must have been from a very early age. In my family, question asking was a sign of interest and curiosity. Asking a question was a sign of flattery. If you liked someone, if you wanted to learn more about them, you had to ask questions. And it was the ultimate compliment. If you didn't care, you wouldn't ask a question, but you should care and you should ask questions. my husband and I tell our kids now, you can't be bored. If you're bored, it means that you're going to go, find something to do. And I think there's something like that. Like everyone is interesting if you ask them the right questions. In the same way that you shouldn't be bored because there's always some question to ask. And so I think that, I have to think, maybe it was even with my grandparents, this idea that if you're sitting there and you're scared because you don't want to talk to grownups or you're bored because you don't want to talk to grownups, if you ask the right questions, you might get a great story. And as a kid, that's entertainment, right? Nothing better than getting through a boring dinner with grownups. I was also the oldest grandchild on both sides of my family, so I always found myself sitting around with grownups. But if you get a good story, that's entertainment. And then down the line, you realized that asking these questions helps get to know people better. And knowing their stories is a way of having them feel sort of safe and like you want to hear their story and you want to be their friend. So I think it became sort of my superpower, but also my crutch. You could drop me into any situation. I can go into a room of strangers and I don't feel nervous because I know I can always ask questions and people are always happy to talk to them, talk about themselves for the most part. So superpower, crutch, these things are intertwined.
You mentioned your sons there and that you tell them that like they can't be bored. That if you're bored, you've got to do something to change that. How do you coach them to be less bored on something and find it more engaging?
Well, I guess the thing is, if they're bored, I'm not going to provide something for them to do. We have books, we have Legos, we have screen time rules. So I think that this idea is that boredom is an opportunity for kids to find ways to be creative. During the pandemic, my younger son discovered a love of building structures, art, or I don't know what you would call it, out of Amazon boxes. And so that is definitely something that came from the boredom. We have this like collection of random things that to some people might look like Amazon boxes trash, but really it's art made out of Amazon boxes and a lot of very colorful tape. But I think that the idea is that if you're bored, again, it's like asking questions. What do I want to do? What will be interesting to me? What will lead me down some rabbit hole? What's the story that I could find with these questions? And for one of my kids, it was creating sculptures out of cardboard.
It's so powerful, Julia, and an important lesson for us all. I've got so many questions for you, as luck would have it, Julia. I'm so curious to go back to your college days and your transition to your professional career. You went to Princeton University. You were the editor of the Daily Princetonian.
One of the editors. I had lots of colleagues there. Yeah.
You're humble. You're so humble. One of the editors of the Daily Princetonian. You come out of college, you go work at Fortune magazine, but you're very specific in the book about not having any accounting classes on your transcript, no economics classes on your transcript, and now you're headed to Fortune magazine to kind of cover the business community and industry. Take me through that, and how did you prepare yourself for that transition?
Well, I had always done journalism, and I thought I was going to go to grad school. I was very interested in international relations and public policy, but I thought that first I'd take some time off before grad school and work at a magazine or a newspaper. And I applied to all these different publications, and there are a lot of business publications. So I found myself applying to all these different business publications, Economist, Bloomberg, Fortune magazine. And Fortune magazine had a philosophy at the time, which I discovered as they offered me the job. And when they offered me the job, I said, you realize I didn't study business or economics. And they said to me, yes, well, Fortune has a philosophy that you could teach a journalist about business much easier than you could teach a business person how to write. And their concept was that being an outsider to the business world, yes, you need to understand it. And I really went through a boot camp, a sort of business school boot camp at the magazine, thanks to the guidance of some of my older colleagues, more established colleagues, who really taught me how to read every SEC document, how to go through analyst notes with a critical eye. But the whole philosophy is that if you're an outsider, then you can bring unique perspective. And if you've spent your whole life in the pharmaceutical industry and then you're writing about it, you might not have the same perspective to be able to translate some of these issues to the general public. So the advantage of being a civilian, if you will, is that my job I see as being a translator from the intensity of these business situations to something that's going to make sense for the general public. Now I cover tech very closely, and I want to understand the technology, but I think a big part of my job is just like I'm going to have to read a lot more data and numbers when it comes to going through SEC filings and then figure out what the big picture takeaway is to translate to the viewing public. I feel like the same thing is true when it comes to technology. I really want to understand how this AI stuff works. I'm not going to go into all these details in a 90-second script on television, but my understanding of it will help me better figure out how to do that translation. And again, in the understanding of all of these things, question asking really helps, because then you're like, okay, I think I really get it now. Now I could translate it for other people who don't have the same background to understand.
How do you tap into that kind of baseline of knowledge that you build on a subject, right? Obviously, you're not bringing all of the data and all of the detail into a 90-second spot on TV, but you're drawing upon it. Do you have a system, a note-taking system, a way of filing things? Is it all just stored in Julia Boorstin's brain? How are you making these connections and putting all this together?
Well, there is an advantage for being in this business for so long. I've been a business journalist for 23 years. And I do every once in a while find myself being like, gosh, I'm so glad I've been doing this forever, because now I could draw connections to something that happened when I covered Facebook's IP a decade ago, or when I was doing that documentary on the future of television 12 years ago. Like all of these things that I've been working on for over 20 years, I see yielding value in my career now. Having said that, I'm a big note taker. And I know that I process information better if I'm taking notes on it. So if I'm going through an analyst report, I'm going to take notes on it. I use Google Docs constantly. I use all of our internal systems in NBC Universal, and I'm constantly taking notes. And I have these big poster boards that I used when I was outlining my book. And just even the process of writing something down helps me remember it better. So sometimes I'll find a notepad full of dozens of pages of notes on some particular topic. I recently found a notepad I used at an AI summit I went to earlier in the year. And I was like, oh, I don't even need to read these notes. But the fact that I wrote it down helped me remember it. And some of the notes were totally illegible. So I was like, good thing I don't need to read some of these. But just the process of taking notes is a real win for me. And then I have just hundreds of Google Docs where I try to save notes. And I like that I can find them on my phone. So I'll be at a conference, I'll be like, oh, what was it that person said at the last conference? And I just pull it up on my phone really quickly. So yeah, I'm a big note taker. I have lists of things everywhere. And I love those giant, multiple feet wide and long poster boards that you could use, like the giant sticky notes whenever I'm outlining something.
Fascinating. Julia, even if I type something up, I find that if I rewrite it by hand, it's easier to remember, or I think more clearly about it. I know before I go give a keynote or do one of these interviews, I had a lot of notes on your career typed up, but I kind of go back before we sit down here and I rewrite some of the things that I read in your book that, I want to try and touch on today, but writing is helpful for me too.
Yeah. And I do the same thing with when I do big interviews, like on stage, I will usually write down my questions on a piece of paper, and then I bring those notes with me. And a number of people have commented, why are you bringing your notes on stage? You never look at them. And I'll say, well, sometimes I look at them, but honestly, it's the process of writing down those questions. And then maybe I glance at them to make sure I'm not missing an important question. And I always just like to have it as a safety blanket on stage if I'm going to be there for an hour for an interview. But no, I totally believe in that process. And I think there's a lot of science around that also about how that helps people write things into their memory effectively.
I feel very similarly. Even here, I'll refer to my notes if I want to get a quote right from your book or a particular number right. And I don't feel like, I just want to make sure. But generally speaking, I'll put a bunch of ideas on paper and then see where the conversation takes us. But it is nice to have it. And there's no replacement for doing the work. I really believe that. Speaking of the work, another thing that you've said before, and this kind of builds on the piece of our conversation a few minutes ago about coming into Fortune magazine without a business background per se, is not only are you bringing a unique perspective, but when you have the work ethic and the ability to prepare like you do, you've talked about that also being another advantage. The gap in the expected knowledge and the knowledge that you have, it forces you, if you have the work ethic and the willingness, to do an immense amount of work to close that gap. And I want you to talk about that a little bit. What are some of the things that you did early on, like the learning how to read an S1 and the SEC documents to close that gap? Because you sure did.
Yeah, I mean, I felt very insecure about the fact that I didn't have a business background. And as a result, I think I overcompensated for that. And one of the things I did is I would sit down with one of these, I was assigned as a reporter to some older writers at the magazine. And I really used that as an sort of apprenticeship opportunity. And in addition to listening in on their interviews, which was really valuable, hearing how a master journalist conducts an interview is so valuable, I would also, though, ask them what they were looking for in terms of research. And they would sort of send me off with a pile of research. And then I'd say, how do I go through this? What are you looking for? I would also sit down with some of these major writers who were at Fortune magazine at the time, including the boss I had for many years, who I did a lot of reporting for, named Andy Serwer, and also this legendary writer and editor, Carol Loomis. And I just remember staying at work until 9 o'clock one night, going through SEC documents with Carol Loomis. And she was really a legend. And she used to write the Berkshire Hathaway annual reports. I mean, she really I thought knew everything. I really was so grateful for her time and attention. And so I was like, I don't know what I'm doing in this world, so I'm going to overcompensate. And as a result, I felt a lot more comfortable because I had put in that work. And as a result, I think I was actually a lot more comfortable writing investing stories that were very numbers driven than some of my colleagues were, who maybe had taken a couple of econ classes, but didn't do the same sort of investment in the deep dive into the numbers as journalists as I had.
I'm curious, Julie, once you became relatively more knowledgeable by doing that work and overcompensating, as you said, was there ever a point where you felt like you got too comfortable then and you said, you know what, I've accumulated enough knowledge now. I don't have to overcompensate as much. Did you ever have to twist that dial a little bit?
No, because every story is a new journey, right? Every story is a new challenge. And one of the things I really enjoyed at Fortune magazine is being a general assignment reporter. I would do a story about J. Crew and Mickey Drexler, who was running the company at the time. And then I'd go over and do a story about Warner Brothers, and I'd do it on Whole Foods. So you were basically parachuting into these different business worlds. And so be like, okay, now I need to understand how this business ecosystem works. And there's some obviously very similar characteristics and narratives, whether it's about a charismatic leader or a company in turmoil, and so there are always these similar storylines that are going to be relevant no matter what industry you're in. But to me, every time it was a new industry, it was a new challenge. And then I moved over to CNBC, where I started off covering media, then I added social media, then I added technology. And even though the world that I report on every day is very much intertwined, the world of media and tech is all basically just one business ecosystem. So in that world, I feel grateful that I have this perspective of more than 15 years covering these industries, so I could draw on references when I'm having a live conversation on television. But I feel like the world is changing so rapidly that you can't say, oh, I know what's going on, because who knows what's going to happen. There are regulatory changes. There's M&A. There are new technological advances. I mean, we were just on a planning call joking that in 3 weeks, who knows what the next thing is going to be in AI. You can't predict how the business world is going to change in 3 weeks, whether it's because of the Fed changing interest rates or something totally unpredictable. So I think it's just really important to keep up with the news. And then every time you have a new story, you feel like you're just jumping in to a new ecosystem to understand what's going on there.
I'm a huge believer in keeping up with the news. I was just at the bus stop yesterday dropping off my daughters, and I had a hard copy of the Wall Street Journal, and somebody was making a joke like, you got to get up on the Times. You don't put that on your iPad. I love the hard copy. I like the iPad too. And I always have CNBC on here in my home office because I just love the flow of information, and I love your reporting. And speaking of your reporting, your book, When Women Lead, is really well reported. I love the book. There's so much rich data and information in there, and so much great analysis as well. And as I've continued along on my journey, talking to so many successful people from different industries, men, women, people from all different walks of life, what I particularly found fascinating was how some of the leadership principles that you uncovered through this reporting apply to everybody, men, women. And there are a lot of these skill sets that have often been forgotten with leaders.
Yeah.
That are so powerful and potent. And I'm curious, why did you write the book when you did? And what was kind of the final impetus to push you to do such a massive project?
I think you're absolutely right. And yes, this book is about the way women tend to lead, but the reality is the ways in which women lead are incredibly valuable for everyone, any gender. Everyone should be taking a page from these female leaders who have defied the odds to have outside success. I was very lucky to get to report this book during the pandemic. So as a result, it was incredibly well researched. I spent just a year and a half interviewing over 120 people, mostly women, and reading 350 academic studies. And so I was just really blown away. And I found myself, again, going down this rabbit hole of question asking, one question leading to another, just really blown away by two things. One is the data. The data. This book started off about wanting to tell the stories of women who had defied the odds. I wrote this book because of what I discovered in my job as a reporter at CNBC and the stories that I was so inspired by doing my work at CNBC. And there were two different initiatives I was focused on at CNBC that really collided and inspired me to write this book. The first one was the Disruptor 50 list. About 11 and a half years ago, I created the Disruptor 50 list to profile fast-growing private companies. I really wanted to get these companies on the radar of our viewers long before the companies went public. And what I saw in reporting on these startups, and again, this is like, we're talking about startups like Snap and Spotify. These are companies that I wanted to make sure our viewers really understood before they filed their S1 to go public. What I saw is that there were two things going on. Number one, female founders were drawing a tiny percentage of funding. The stats I kept on coming across were shocking. Female founders between around 2011 and 2021 drew 3% or less of all venture capital dollars. And it's not like this is a number that went up and down and that was just the average. This was a very consistent number, 3%. And on the other hand, the women I was interviewing who were running the companies in the Disruptor 50 were so fascinating to me and incredibly personally inspiring. I found that they were leading their companies differently. They were taking different approaches to management and scaling. They were more likely to be focused on purpose. And oftentimes they were focused on problems that their male counterparts just weren't as focused on. So I would walk away from an interview with one of these female CEOs and I would think, oh my gosh, this woman has truly defied the odds. No wonder she's so impressive. She's by definition exceptional. She's an exception to the rule. She's among the very few that have drawn that 3% venture capital funding. And I wanted to share those stories. So the other initiative I was working on was Closing the Gap, which is something I founded in the wake of the Me Too Time's Up movement to help profile companies and individuals that were closing gender and equity gaps. And through that research, I really saw how important it was to elevate positive success stories because so much of the media's focus is on those few women who have had spectacular failures. So I'm talking about like Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos. She is a rare example. Not only is she a rare example of a female CEO, but she's also a rare example of a failure. So what I wanted to do was tell the alternative to that. There are 60 women in my book who are phenomenal success stories who have defied ridiculous odds against them to scale and grow companies, or in some cases, I have two big nonprofits in there. And what I realize is if they had defied those odds, they would have leadership guidelines, leadership stories, leadership inspirations for everyone. We all want to defy the odds, right? And these women have done it and we can all learn from them. So I started off by just wanting to tell their stories and I did all these interviews. And after my first probably dozen interviews, I realized it was not going to be enough just to tell these stories. I needed to explain why the approaches these women were taking were so effective because their approaches were very different from the stereotype of male leadership. Move fast and break things, hierarchical, top down, corner office. That's not how these women were leading. So the stories led me into the research and then I dug into all of these academic studies so I could say, here's how this woman is leading. Tell the story and explain, here's why her strategies and tools are so successful. And here's why everyone will be more successful if they can emulate some of the things she's doing. Notably, I don't outline just one approach to leadership. All the women in the book lead in their own unique ways. And I think that's really essential here, is that what I saw is that successful leaders don't all do the same thing. Successful leaders are all authentic to themselves and are honest about their skills and strengths and what they're not so good at, so they can hire people who can complement them. And so I really just was excited to tell these stories. And it was fascinating that this book that was going to be a lot shorter really turned into a narrative and research project, not just about telling stories. I hope the fact that there's so much data can not only be really empowering, make people explain what's happening in the world around them, but also can help provide a roadmap so people can understand what they should be doing to be more successful in the workforce and how they can learn from these women.
What I found particularly interesting about the data is I have seen elements of some of the data that you shared in different places. And I have 2 young daughters. I'm particularly interested in this stuff. I'm an active part of the business community and different ecosystems myself. I've seen different parts of the data that you've shared elsewhere. But to see it all together in one book is so powerful and illuminating that in and of itself was impressive.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is no one has gathered all of this data and put it into one place. I didn't create this data, but what I did is I did go through 350 academic studies and find the most relevant data and explained how all of these data points connected. What's striking to me is that all the research is not in conflict with each other. All the research says the same thing, or versions of the same thing, or builds on the same key points. And my book's incredibly positive. I do not dwell on it, but I do have a chapter talking about double standards and how to overcome them. And again, this is valuable not just for women, but for anyone who feels like they're in a marginalized group or are part of a group that's not the homogenous, dominant majority group. But the vast majority of my book is not actually about that, but about how to use leadership strengths and skills and things that have been sort of traditionally seen as maybe flaws and how to use them as business superpowers. And the data is amazing. I mean, the data just about the power of diversity, whether it's at the C-suite or running a startup, is overwhelming. Diverse teams perform better. And the part of the book and the part of the research that I think about almost every day, especially as I work with teams, because television is a team sport, is that the real value of diversity does not come just from an outsider bringing a new perspective, but that the original homogenous group tends to get smarter. They re-examine their assumptions. They think about things maybe they were taking for granted because they know that the other people there aren't just like them. So there's a lot of that interesting data, but also data about how to use things like empathy or vulnerability or gratitude and why those lead to better business outcomes.
Julia, speaking of humble and vulnerable and leading to better business outcomes and surrounding yourself with people who make you smarter, one story in the book that struck me in particular as I continue on this journey to find tart pullers all over the world is the one about Katrina Lake and Stitch Fix and how you discovered that she was this talent magnet. And she was this talent magnet in a way that maybe at the time surprised you, but certainly on the surface to many would be surprising as to how she was acquiring at such an early stage company at that point, all of these really credible people to jump ship from what they were doing and join her on her journey. What did you find specifically with Katrina Lake that was so unique?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because I would interview these founders and then I would interview a lot of other people about them. And a lot of times investors would say, you've got to interview this woman whose company I backed. She's amazing. And so multiple people said to me, oh, you have to include Katrina Lake. Her story's amazing. And her key superpower, she's a talent magnet. I was like, ooh, talent magnet. Everyone would want to be a talent magnet. What does that mean? So I interviewed Katrina and I was like, how did you hire all these people? And so she sort of brushed off the question. And then I went down, I was going to do a follow-up with her. I went down the rabbit hole and I was doing all this research, looking for academic studies on what it means to be a talent magnet or to be able to attract super high level talent. And I was really hoping to find a wealth of research about what makes someone better able to attract top talent than someone else. And there really was nothing. I was so frustrated. So I kept on going back to her and then saying, just explain to me, you were running this little tiny company or a relatively small company. How did you get the head of algorithms from Netflix to come work for you? How did you get the head of Walmart's website to come work for you? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me why these people take such a huge risk on such a small and untested company and concept, really coming up with just like a whole new concept of Stitch Fix. And she really didn't have a clear answer for me. But the more I pushed, I said, well, just walk me through what happened when you hired these people. And what it really came down to is she was totally transparent and vulnerable about what her strengths were and what her weaknesses were. And when it came to attracting the head of algorithms from Netflix, she said, look, this is not my area of expertise. I need someone who's going to be really strong in this area and can go and own this space and can take this and run with it and can really have a sense of autonomy as they build out this part of our business. So her vulnerability about not knowing this area that she was trying to hire in and enabled sort of collaboration and also enabled a real sense that this person was going to be able to go and build something without her micromanaging them. And so it really worked out well. Notably, I've talked about this story with a lot of other female founders, and a lot of them said they've used similar tactics, but a lot of them also said you have to be really careful about this. You can't perform vulnerability, and you also have to be very clear about what you're good at and what you want this other person to be good at. And if you're not very transparent about these things and saying like, hey, I've got this business under control, but here's where I want you to lead. Otherwise, there can be confusion or even a sense that it's being performative, like, oh, come help me, when what you really want is someone just to be strategically focused on one thing. So I think this idea of honest vulnerability, inviting collaboration is incredibly powerful. And this myth of the talent magnet sometimes is something just very simple. Inviting people to come with you and take the lead in their field, but to be really careful about how you're doing this. You don't want to have someone come and have them think that they're going to be taking over your job because you don't know what you're doing. You just need to be very clear about delineating your strengths and your weaknesses.
Why, in any context, business, personal, anything, why are some people hesitant to be vulnerable? Why do you think that is?
I mean, there are a lot of reasons to not be vulnerable, and especially for women who don't want to be perceived as weak. I mean, the main reason people avoid sharing vulnerability is because they're afraid it's going to draw further attack. Or I've heard from a lot of women, they're afraid they're not going to be taken seriously if they don't know everything about everything. And women already don't fulfill the stereotype of a male leader. And so they feel like they don't want to show any weakness that would further give someone ammunition that they don't deserve to be where they are and they haven't earned it. But of course, that's not the case when you actually look at how it works in business. Leaders who are vulnerable build a lot more trust with their employees. And we saw this consistently throughout the pandemic, where leaders who said, the situation is changing. Here's what I know. I know that our business is going to be strong over the long run, but here's what we don't know right now. We don't know what's going to happen with X, Y, and Z part of our business. And these are concerning to me. And I want your help collaborating with me on this. That balance of strength and vulnerability, I think, is really essential no matter what you're dealing with. And I think this myth of an all-knowing, omnipotent leader is obviously wrong. I mean, nobody can know everything all of the time. And one thing is for sure is that we're in an incredibly volatile and unpredictable business environment. And there's no denying that things change constantly. And nobody knows what's going to happen around the corner. So that honesty about here's the plan we're making, we may have to change the plan in 2 months if the situation changes. That kind of honesty and vulnerability of like, I don't know how this is going to go, but this is our best plan for now, is really compelling and important for employees to know that their boss is being real with them.
What else? You're a parent, I'm a parent, whether people out there are listening, whether they're parents or they just care about a young person in their life. Now that you've done all this reporting, and obviously it's hard to pick one or two things, is there one or two things that you really, as a parent, want to emphasize, in your case, in your sons, in my case, in my daughters, that you really need to develop this skill? And if you don't have it, you've got to cultivate it. Like, is there one or two things that you think are critically important over everything else?
There are so many things. We could talk for hours about all the things that I think are important in general in leadership, but also for parenting. So it's hard to pick just one, but I will mention gratitude and patience. If you have kids, kids tend not to be patient. I am incredibly impatient. I work in the world of live television where everything is super fast. So that's helpful. But in general, I'm not known to be a patient person. I want everything to move quickly. Having said that, I understand the value of patience, especially in business, especially in decision-making, especially when you're a kid and trying to study for a test that seems like it's a year away when it's just 3 days away. There's one study about gratitude and patience that I think about all the time, and I think is a valuable thing as a parent to instill in my kids. And the research has found that people who practice gratitude, which literally just means thinking about things you're grateful for, instills patience and makes you better able to make decisions for the long run rather than make a decision for a short-term win. And notably, the reason I write about this in my book is that women are more likely to practice gratitude. And there are some studies showing that women actually enjoy the feeling of gratitude more than men do. This is not something that's biological. This is socialized. Men are often, unfortunately, taught to think if you feel too grateful, maybe you owe someone something, and that makes you feel uncomfortable. Whereas women are socialized to sort of practice talking about things they feel grateful for and to enjoy that feeling. Everyone should be talking about and thinking about what they feel grateful for, because then they're more likely to make the decision for the long-term better outcome rather than feeling an anxiety. I don't feel good with where I am right now. I'm going to go for the near-term win and maybe forego a better outcome over the long term. So I always try to ask my kids what they feel grateful for as a way to just make them sort of feel grounded and not so anxious to have the piece of candy right now or whatever their near-term gratification would be. But I think that's key. And then the other thing is just authenticity. We're all our own people. I have 2 boys. I don't want them to compare themselves to each other. And I think it's really important for everyone to find their own unique way of leading. What is it that you like to do? Like, what do you love to do the most? How can you get better at that thing? What are you not so good at? Everyone has those things that they're not so good at. For me, maybe it's patience. And how can we get better at our weaknesses and really improve upon our weaknesses and hone our strengths? And I think instilling that in this concept of a growth mindset into kids is just essential. Every leader who's ever been successful, male or female, has had a growth mindset. And talk about one of those things that's just non-negotiable. We all need to have a growth mindset. And to me, I really believe a growth mindset is the combination of humility, knowing that you have to keep on growing and learning and changing, and you don't know everything yet, and then confidence that you can keep that growth up. And to me, that balance of growth and humility is what I hope I have, but also what I hope my kids can have going forward.
Absolutely, Julia. And I can tell you one thing that I am authentically grateful for is your time and this conversation, because I have learned so much. There is no question that you are a TARP puller, and through your career, you have lived the principles of the everybody pulls the TARP way through your humility and your confidence and your willingness to bring people together for the greater good. So, Julia, I really appreciate you spending a few minutes with me this week. I wish you all the continued success. I hope that one day our kids and everybody else's kids look back at this book and say, they can't believe the data. They can't believe the data.
Yes. I hope the data in this book, I hope all the data in When Women Lead becomes irrelevant because the gender gaps have closed and everyone is able to lead in a way that's most authentic to them.
Julia, thank you so much for your time, and we'll have to catch up again soon, all right?
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of TARP pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today's a great day to pull the TARP. I am rooting for you. See you next time.